It is Thursday, March 7th, 2019, and this is the MMA Beat. Welcome, everyone. My name is Luke Thomas. I'm the host of this program. I'm from SiriusXM as well as MMAfighting.com. To my left are a bunch of jamokes that we have assembled for your viewing pleasure. To my left, it is Danny Segura from MMAfighting.com. Then it's Brian Campbell from CBS Sports and every other place on earth. And then at the very end, it is Chuck Mindenhall from The Ringer as well as MMAfighting.com. Back from his many travails, his sojourn away from the show. Did you miss us?
Not really.
Yeah, of course you did.
Nice to get away.
Of course you didn't. All right, so much to get to, including all of your tweets, which you have been sending using the hashtag #TheMMABeat. We have assembled those. We will get to them after the normal course of programming on a segment we call After the Beat. So thank you guys so much for that. All right, boys and girls, let us get right into it. Danny, I will go to you first. There is a UFC card this weekend. You may not have heard that, but it is true. UFC Wichita.
I heard, yeah.
Yes, you have heard of it. It is UFC Wichita. It's an interesting card. There's not a whole lot to it in terms of major divisional stakes, I think is a fair point to make. Also, if it's anything like the Aldo fight against Moicano, the full-on ESPN Plus cards, not sure who watches those, because after that was over, all of the content I made on all my various jobs did okay, not great. So if that was Aldo and that was ESPN Plus, Lord knows how this is going to be. But okay, let's assume people watch. Forget all that for just a second. Let's start with the main event. You have Derek Lewis taking on Junior Dos Santos. Is a title shot on the line, Danny Segura?
I don't think so, especially not for Derek Lewis. He's just coming off, a loss against, the champ, Daniel Cormier. But Junior Dos Santos, if he wins, it'll be 3 in a row. And, it'll definitely put him closer to that talk. And I think he might be a player, and he could very well be involved in a title eliminator bout, if he wins, especially if he wins, in an exciting fashion. However, I don't see a straight title shot. We know Daniel Cormier is sitting out right now. He's injured. And we also know he wants that big payday with Brock Lesnar. And also, Dana White has said it. He's like, I want to do right by Daniel Cormier. We got to hook him up with that Brock Lesnar fight, that big money fight. So, a title shot, not yet.
Let me add one little detail. Yeah. Lewis is ranked 3rd in the division.
That's true. Yeah.
JDS, I think I'm wrong. I could be wrong. But I think he's 7, something like that.
But nonetheless, the heavyweight division right now is very murky. There's a lot of things going on. So I think it definitely pushes his case. He'll be in those talks, but nowhere close to a title shot.
Boys. Yeah, I can only piggyback on that and say he can't win a title shot in this fight, but he can certainly lose it and push himself back in that conversation. I don't think Derek Lewis necessarily gets a push either. I think it's just an interesting main event with the potential for violence in there. Potential for a fight that stays on the feet the whole time between two heavyweights who can punch.
Is that it? If you had to say what's the biggest potential upside for each winner, what is it? Again, potential upside, not guaranteed.
The potential upside for each winner is that you take a step further in the rankings, and if people get hurt, or if Brock doesn't come back because Vince McMahon throws too much money at him, then you're in a good spot. But you're not jumping the line. There is a Brock-sized bottleneck at the top of that division, aided by the fact that Cormier's injured, aided by the fact that Jones, I think, should go there. We'll probably get more into Jones here, but I don't think you're just going to cut right ahead.
Yeah, I just feel like the whole thing is too murky at the top. So I'm not sure where that will leave everything. The only thing I will say is that since it's not definitive that Brock Lesnar is going to be that guy, that Junior Dos Santos, from his own perspective, should probably be looking at it like, hey, this is my title shot, and he should probably use that microphone afterwards if he gets a big knockout and say, like, hey, it's my time again, and plant that seed. But beyond that, I think that, just given the murkiness of the situation you guys are talking about, and then you have Stipe Miocic, of course, who's sitting up there like chopped liver. I don't know how you could just go right past him.
You got
in the
Ngannou
scenario
as well.
Yeah, it's like Ngannou is still up there. So it's one of those situations where he's got to, if he does something emphatic, we're a fan base that basically is, what have you done for me lately? What's the last thing we saw? And he would then, I don't know about pole position, but he would put himself right in there. And you never know, man. If things go his way, he may end up getting that title shot.
So let's go ahead, Brian.
I was going to say, if Lewis wins, you're probably fighting Stipe. If JDS wins, you're probably just sitting in the bullpen for the best available opportunity.
So this is what I would like to examine then. For each main event competitor, what would it say about them if they won, right? So let's start with Derek Lewis. As you noted, coming off that Cormier loss, it really seems to sit, it seems to have sat really sour with him. And you would imagine any loss to do that for any high-level UFC fighter. But that one in particular seems to be bothering him. So let's start with him there. Number one, he gets this opportunity to rebound. But here's what I'm wondering, Brian. If he wins, and let's say he wins emphatically in some kind of way, not like the Volkanovski emphasis, but maybe he's losing it in parts, but not this Hail Mary, let's say, okay? To me, that would be pretty impressive because you'd be beating a guy who not only was a former champion, but a guy who has adapted his style, fought at range, jabbed Ben Rothwell all the way to a 5-round victory. If you can avoid that, I'm not saying we necessarily learn anything a whole lot new, and I don't know how much it jumps you in the rankings over a Francis, over a Stipe. But in terms of solidifying the respect he might deserve as a legitimate threat to very good, even veteran fighters, that's a big accomplishment if he can make it happen.
I think that's a fair take. I think that would put him out of the idea of is he just a one and done when it comes to the title level? Because that's my biggest fear for Derek Lewis coming in. Yeah, he turned it around on short notice against DC, got himself in tremendous shape for him to be able to get into that title fight. But what he talked about all week during that fight week in New York was that I don't care about the title. I don't care about DC. I'm a mercenary. I'm here for the money. So if you can say that all I want, but the man inside had to puff himself up with the idea of I really could be UFC champion. I could go from jail to the top. And when you lose that badly and you don't get that, what's his motivation to get back to this level? Is it just paychecks? Yeah. Because if it's just paychecks, you can live a long time headlining shows in UFC Zagreb and Wichita and all these places. But if it's more than that, if he can beat JDS definitively, well, then in his favor is he's never fought Stipe, so that's a fight you can make. He's fought Ngannou, but that's certainly inconclusive in terms of that. So I think there's a lot more for him to gain in a lot of ways than Junior Dos Santos.
I think it's hard to take Derek Lewis entirely at face value when he says things, because he has contradicted himself over the course of time. And then if you just know his backstory a little bit and everything that he wanted to do, and like some of the moments that really carried him away was just getting Bruce Buffer to announce his name, things like that. The natural escalation in this game is obviously a title. I think he downplayed it psychologically so that he would not put any extra pressure, because it was such a whirlwind. All of a sudden they're in New York and he's doing this fight right after his knockout. People are talking about it. It wasn't a ton of time to digest the matchup. And so he went in there and he wasn't able to do it. But I know that it bothers him because I know it matters to him on some level to get that belt. So I think that it's a situation where, even talking about Junior Dos Santos, I talked to him a couple of days ago, you can tell that it's still there. I mean, you can't avoid the idea that it's all working towards something, right? So I feel like he knows that the bigger money is there. He's just got his Lamborghini. This guy's he understands what the money's about a little bit at this level now.
Who just got a Lamborghini?
Derek Lewis did.
Did he?
Yeah. I mean, he's he's a guy who's
that Popeyes money.
Yeah. He's always so funny and candid about his conversations with his wife, who was telling him at first you don't need this anymore, and now she's like, wait a minute, Lamborghini. He jokes about that sort of thing, but I think that obviously getting a title, and that comes with a whole different pay stride. He just got a new contract. So I think it's one of those situations where his goal is still to win the title. I don't care what he says. He might downplay it in the moment to put himself psychologically in there, but he wants to get back.
Could he have popped his own balloon where it's like, he was admitted he never tried his hardest in training camp. He comes in a little bit heavy. Tried pretty damn hard against DC and the best opportunity and came up very short. So in his mind, I'm never going to try that hard again. Why? What am I going to gain? I'm not title material. Yeah. I'm wondering if that's part of, because it would match the comments he had leading into that fight.
I actually have a different perspective on it. I think going into it kind of felt, and everybody kind of treated it as a gimme fight. It was literally 30 days right after his other fight. Just 30 days before, he was saying he doesn't deserve to fight for a title. He's not in shape for that. And then there he goes. He goes in there, shows up. We saw what happened. But then after the fight, I noticed he was extremely upset, and I just felt like the competitor in him realized, being in there with this, he's like, I could maybe beat this guy if I really tried and I put in the effort. So I feel like he sort of faced those questions with himself.
He faced the pain, if you will.
Faced the pain, exactly. So I wonder what version of Derek Lewis we're going to get. I feel like we're going to get a more focused one, and I feel like he tasted, I can get to the top, and doing what he was doing before. Let me see if I step this up. Let me see how far I can get.
And then you have JDS, as I mentioned, ranked 7th, but on a pretty nice win streak. What does it say if he beats Derek Lewis? Because as I mentioned, he kind of fought somebody like Ben Rothwell, who I'm not saying that Rothwell and Lewis are identical, but there is some pretty significant overlap there where you've got these guys who are not necessarily the most mobile, heavy hitters. Obviously, Rothwell probably more of a submission threat. I would say better ground and pound from Derek Lewis. So they're not the same, but okay. They're not. This is not Anderson Silva versus John Lineker or something. They're pretty comparable. What aside from the ranking stuff, just as a fighter, what can he say if he beats someone like Derek Lewis? And again, let's say relatively emphatically. Who wants to jump on that?
That he's not washed, that he's still a potential title contender?
Yeah.
That's it?
I mean, his winning streak, look, in the heavyweight division, you don't need a long winning streak to be back. I mean, let's not forget Arlovsky was really close to a title shot a couple years ago. But has his winning streak been that impressive? It's been guys where he had the style to look good against. It's 2 in a row. He's pretty much wins and loses every other fight since the Kane trilogy, so it's kind of hard to see. I mean, his name is big and it's going to keep him in it. I think he's still got it. I don't think he's, I don't think he's too far on that other side. I think he's still a threat to anyone. Still some fun matchups with guys he hasn't fought on the elite level, but I don't think it's too much of a statement. I think it's more of a status quo. I think he moves. It's a sidestep. It's I'm still here more than anything else.
I would actually say it's a little bit of a statement because one of the things that we look at how great someone is if they can fight through generations. That's one of the things that made GSP such a great fighter. Well, he beat, perhaps Ivanov is more of an old school guy, but man, he beat Taito Iwasa, a guy that's part of the new guard, and you can rank Derek Lewis part of the new guard as well. So if you're hanging in there with the new guard of the heavyweight division, it says something, especially. We just saw Cain Velasquez go against Francis Ngannou, and that didn't turn out, too well for him. So if he's still picking up wins at this stage, if he's able to put together a 3-5 win streak, I think that says something about him.
It's amazing that he still has like a sort of vital relevance at this stage. I mean, the guy debuted in 2008 against Verdum. Remember that when he knocked him out?
Yeah,
uppercut from Bell.
Yeah, I mean, that's a long time to be in this, and he's been
said
fighting
packing
monsters
from the
the whole
UFC.
way. Yeah, he's been fighting monsters the whole way, and the fact that we're still debating, like, does he still have it? And most of us sort of think, well, I think he does. That says something about his competitiveness. I think he's that good. He's also a smart guy, like you said. He game plans a little more than some of the other heavyweights and things like that. So,
And he looks like, from what I can tell from his training at ATT, he trains incredibly hard.
yeah.
Here's the one thing. It's like, for me, it's like all roads lead to Francis, I think. Because if Derek Lewis wins, let's say he knocks out JDS, you're like, well, okay, I can't imagine many fights that suck that bad you would want to see run back, but that might be one of them. Yeah. And he's right. Derek Lewis and Francis, I think, are separated by 1 in the rankings. So, okay. But then if you're JDS, you don't necessarily have to go to Francis, but you don't run Stipe back because they already ran that back in Dallas, and Stipe finished him in under a round. So that doesn't make any sense, which leaves Stipe in a bit of a weird position. Question for the table. Who does Stipe Miocic want to win this weekend?
Jeez.
I would say Derek Lewis. Yeah.
No, he doesn't. Stipe wants JDS to win because he knows UFC, to back up your point, will not make that trilogy. But if Derek Lewis wins, that means Stipe's one step further from getting a title shot because they'll go, you haven't fought Lewis yet. Yeah. Lewis is revived.
Yeah, but you still have to fight for. I mean, do we really think that Stipe is going to get an immediate title shot? I do not believe this at this point.
Yeah.
Well, he's going to have to fight somebody now. Who that is, I don't know, but.
When are we? The question is, when are we going to find out about Brock? And I think Dana said it himself in the post-fight press conference on Saturday, saying, I haven't heard. Brock will call me when he's ready.
Right.
We know he's tied up through WrestleMania.
Like, even if it's not Brock Lesnar, I think that they would still go with somebody else.
When is WrestleMania?
April 7th.
Yeah. So soon. Okay, soon. How soon do you think he could fight after that?
Right away. He's in great shape, and he's barely on TV. He's on the TV every 3 weeks. So.
Okay, all right. Oh, well, it'll be interesting to see what happens with the heavyweight division. Again, not the biggest stakes in the world, but some pretty big ones. Anything else from the card that anyone cares about, or do you want me to go first on that? I have one that I actually really like. Anthony Rocco Martin is on this card. Anthony Martin was Tony Martin when he first came to the UFC. He came as a purple belt. I believe he has advanced to black belt. I think he's still with ATT. He's Kayla Harrison's boyfriend, but of course that's not really relevant. But although you will see her, I think, corner him, which makes sense, obviously. But in any event, here's a guy who I think came in as a good fighter, and it still remains to be seen exactly what his upside is, but he has turned on a ferocity that has matched the development of his game. He's going out there and ruining people and then getting on the mic and sticking it in everyone's face a little bit. He grew out the chops. He went back to like the old school name. Like, he's got some swag, man. He has got some. And he's on the prelim card still, which kind of bums me out. But
his girlfriend's a millionaire. He's got nothing to lose, It is relevant.
Glad you're here, Brian. In any event, I'm looking forward to seeing what he has going on. Anybody else on the table?
I would say Tim Means versus Nico Price. That's Just Bleed, GIF, GIF, whatever you want to call it, all over it. So I'm down for that.
I'm down for that violence, and of course I'm down for Big Ben Rothwell's comeback. I mean, look, it's been 3 years, and I know he's coming off that loss to Junior Dos Santos, as is his opponent on Saturday, Blago Ivanov. But here's the deal.
Blagoy.
Here's the deal, though. Rothwell, before that loss, yes, one-sided boxing loss to JDS. He had become sort of a creative out in this division where it's like the strength, the size, mixed with the sneaky submission game, really, I think, made him maybe not a true title contender, but a tough out, a guy you want to see against these other guys. Not a big fan of his dancing or his evil laugh, but he is funny.
He's usually
he's a wild card.
An easy interview before the fight, like he wants to talk and he's very media friendly, and this time he's just shut it all down. So there's a little bit of intrigue also just about the chip on his shoulder.
Ben?
Ben.
I've tried mightily.
Yeah,
to get
same
him.
here. I mean, he just, there's something about that makes you want to see like what form he shows up in. I will say the Drew Dober Dariush fight is also like it is similar to the one you were just mentioning. That's got some potential to be fireworks.
Tim Boach is on this card, which is kind of interesting. Your co-main event, I spoke to him this week, Curtis Millender. I thought it was Millender, but he told me it's Millender. Taking on Elizeu Zaleski dos Santos, who just switches stance. Yeah, in the co-main. Switches stance constantly. Louis Smolka is back on the card. Matt Schnell, Danger, from that MTV show. I think he's kind of up against it. He needs a big win here.
Former title challenger Yana Kunitskaya is on this one?
Yeah, against Marion Renault. And by the way, Anthony...
That's actually a good fight.
Anthony Rocco Martin taking on Sergio Moraes. So... that should be kind of interesting. Say again?
Card of the year?
Yeah, so about that, no.
I think so, yeah.
How about best card ever in Kansas for UFC?
How about, right. Best one ever in Wichita. All right, let's jump to UFC 235 if we can. I didn't want to start the show that way because it's a little bit been talked to death. But there are some leftovers that I would like to talk about. In fact, I was tweeting about one of them today. We're not going to relitigate it here because we simply don't have the time and it's not the appropriate forum. But this is one. So, whatever one makes of the calls that Mark Goddard made in the Usman versus Woodley fight, I'm of the belief that they were okay, but I recognize there's a diversity of viewpoints on this one, and many would disagree. That's fine. I think that there is a little bit of unanimity, though, around the idea that him lashing out on Twitter against John Anik, the commentator, probably not a good idea. It just doesn't facilitate anyone understanding Goddard's thought process. It's a bad look. I don't know if you guys saw, but Ray Longo, Matt Serra, Kenny Florian, they murdered him on their podcast this week. I played some of the audio yesterday on my radio show. They were calling him arrogant and he doesn't get it. Like, it clearly backfired when he did. But this is what I was wondering. How should referees respond to criticism? And the idea that they shouldn't, or that they should just say what they want, I don't think that works either. Because either you get silence, or they take to social media. Social media makes us meaner, and it does not facilitate proper conversation, which is what you need. So, let me ask you boys, what responsibility, if any, or what is the right idea about how to get referees to not answer to every criticism, but to explain what they're doing? Is there a formalized process that we can or should set up? Brian, I'll go to you on this one.
I'll start with that. And whether it's boxing or MMA, it's the same thing. I think I've said it on the show before. I think to make judges and referees accountable in these type of situations, you just make them part of the journalistic narrative, which is have them show up at the post-fight press conferences, make media availability. Maybe not make it where you can talk to them all week. They can shoot themselves in the foot on Twitter in that regard. But set up that so we can get their take, so we can analyze it. I think it helps their name because they can stand up and they can maybe give you something else to think about that was going on in their head. They can maybe make the idea of being a referee or a judge more. Let us understand how hard that is. There's a split-second decision you have to make. But to back up the point of him on Twitter, I have no problem with it from this standpoint, okay? The UFC MMA is the only sport where it seems like the powers that be go after the officials regularly. If you went after the official in the NBA or NFL, you would get in trouble, right?
Okay, but there's a referees association in the NBA that they speak up, they acknowledge error. These guys have no
So because
platform.
It's the Wild West, and because Dana White,
That's right.
the head of the UFC, will just straight up Steve Mazzagatti your ass, you know what I mean, and just basically ruin your name publicly, and you just said all those guys murdered him. What's the common thread with all those names that you mentioned? All pretty much UFC company men, right? So the UFC...
I don't think that's fair. Just Sarah, maybe. I don't know that Longo's a company guy. That doesn't really sound right to me.
All right, well... You're right. I can't speak for him on that, but I'll just say this. Like, when the company takes their stance where we're not going to respect these officials because they don't hire them, so they're just going to trash them at any point. Maybe that wasn't the perfect way for Goddard to do on social media, but he stood up for himself. And he also came at you with an 8-part bit that was very friendly, but I like that he took the time to explain that on Twitter to you a couple minutes before we started the show.
Yeah, I still haven't read that actually yet.
Yeah.
I would like for referees to be a little bit more open with the media. I mean, on Twitter, you got 80 characters now, or 60, something like that?
280.
280? Yeah. To explain yourself. So a lot of things get lost, within that. And, it's a tough job. It's a really difficult job. So it would help, the fans, the media, for the referee to go out there and explain the decisions, because maybe they saw something in there that we didn't, So, I think more transparency with the media would go across well.
The one thing you don't want to do is to kind of use it as a dangling carrot for your podcast. It's going to come, I'll address this whole thing on my podcast with Dan Hardy. Stay tuned, that sort of thing. I think that was part of what rubbed people the wrong way as well, on some level. But I would like to see kind of what you're saying. I would like to see if there's a controversy within a call, you just want to hear from that person fairly immediately in some kind of statement form or something. All you want to do is know what they're talking about, not plugging a podcast, nothing like that, but to just know what they were thinking, give a basic idea of what they were thinking. Because then at least we're operating, when we're talking about it or anybody else is talking about it and trying to figure this out, at least we're operating from a little bit more of an enlightened
Okay, but
place.
here's my question. UFC cannot compel them to do that.
True.
Commissions can. How do we get commissions to compel that? I have an idea. You want to hear it?
Yeah.
Now, I realize raise your hand here if you remember the MMA JA. No one really?
I remember it.
Well,
Yeah, I remember
you are?
it, yeah.
So raise your hand, Donk.
Raise that thing.
I don't want to raise my head. Go ahead.
But yes. But you're a member.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. I'm not. Are you?
No.
And you?
No.
Okay. So I'm not either. So they're not going to. I recognize they're going to not listen to what I have to say, which no one does in MMA, even though I have many, many good ideas. Anyway, here's one of them.
You got any ideas about PEDs?
Yeah, I have a few of them.
Okay.
But here's the point.
At least I think I'm a member. Now I'm wondering if I've ever paid my dues. But anyways, go ahead.
Here's a way I think they could create some value, which is Nevada, I think, is a lost cause. I could be wrong about that, but it's run by people who have, I'm not sure they have brains, but they do have ganglia bobbing at the end of their spine that helps them accomplish very simple tasks like grabbing and digestive.
Cashing checks.
Right, cashing checks. Beyond that, I don't know what they can do, but the commission in California, which is the most important one in terms of size, is going to be California. Andy Foster is nothing, if at least not open to criticism. He goes out and does the media rounds. Yeah. I think the MMAJA should strike a deal with the commission where they could say something like, we'll send one pool reporter to talk to, you can pick, and I'm making up something, you could pick one referee. So this wouldn't even solve the problem, but I think it gets us a little closer. Give one pool reporter 5 to 10 minutes with one referee who made some kind of a controversial call. So the referee knows he's not going to be hectored by somebody who barely has a credential. The referee can say what they have to say in a short amount of time, in a concise way. If they want to comment after that, they can, but they wouldn't have to. I'm not suggesting to you this solves the problem, but I think it puts us a lot further than let's lash out at each other on social media where everybody gets mean.
Well, to defend NSAC, they did have Bob Bennett at the post-fight. I'm not saying what he said was super great, but
he is totally disingenuous.
They had him at the press conference at least.
I understand. Let me ask you something. Let's be serious about this. What value is there in his appearance there? And I'm asking honestly. I'm not even trying to be vindictive.
Just so somebody like me has to raise their hand and say, by the way, they did have Bob Bennett there. That's the value of it. To say we were accountable.
I mean, when he shows up and says it's a no-brainer on one of the most difficult, controversial calls, you cannot trust this person to make adult decisions. Yeah. He is not capable of that.
I mean, he's in that same role in boxing when Canelo Golovkin has a crap scorecard and people talk to him about it after he says, I'm sorry, these are my judges, I'll stand by them. And people are like...
Right. This is not a person who you can have an adult conversation with. Andy Foster is. And Nick Limbo is out here in Jersey. I think there's an opportunity there. And again, I'm not a member of the organization. They can do what they want. But it seems to me that's a real opportunity to fix a small portion of the problem. But it could have
But then you have competing journalists. It just fixes it if you put them at the
but my understanding is the MMAJA already sends one pool reporter to talk to Dana at certain events. They get one, which is they'll send one out. I think it was Sean El-Shadi once that did it. So otherwise some outlets wouldn't get in. They've already shown a propensity to do this. Like, it's a real thing you could do. Because if I call up Andy Foster, he might let me talk to one, just as like a thing or something, but there's no formalized process. Someone has to strike a deal. And I think that I could be wrong, but I think they're probably best situated to do that.
How about before they fix that, they can fix some kind of unified rule so that every state uses the same rules so that all the fighters and broadcasters
I like that idea.
And guys who are willing to knee people in the face, understand what's going on.
Well, it's like if you're articulating that MMA has a rules innovation problem and that it's inconsistent over places in very difficult and meandering ways, and that we have entrusted the government entities to do innovation, which, in retrospect, probably we didn't think that one through, then yeah, we have a problem. But I'm just trying to figure out we need an open. Like, here's the thing: I had other referees who coached, let's say, high school volleyball or something. and they were saying, I don't really want referees speaking out. And I do agree, if every referee had the answer for everything they did, that's a problem, man. You're going to get them paranoid and not thinking straight. But on the other hand, this is regulated by the government, and the stakes are serious, both in pay and in health and everything else. You do have to answer something. Something has to be. That's my proposal for a way forward.
Yeah.
Anyone have anything else to add?
Maybe we'll just make a rule they have to show up on Mark Goddard's podcast to talk about it. Huh?
Maybe we can start the MMAJAA, right? The MMA Journalists Association.
Anonymous, yes.
And then we can hit up the California Athletic Commission, and we can be the ones that ask questions. How about that? That's a good idea. All right. No one thinks about these things, but, you know. There's your free idea, MMAJA. You can have it. All right. So then it takes us to another interesting part of UFC 235 coming out of it. Boy, the curious case of Cody Garbrandt. Danny.
Yep.
I'll just throw this out to you. What do you make of what has happened to him?
Yeah, it must be a combination of a bunch of things. We don't know exactly until we actually speak to him, but he's definitely a completely different fighter than the guy who fought Cruz, and that's worrisome because it's a very young guy, still has plenty of years left in his career, and you thought he was the next big thing, at least from my vantage point. Like when I was watching him, fight Dominic Cruz, and after he beat him, and he brought that kid onto the octagon, it just felt big. It felt like, wow, this could be. And then we had Max Holloway also on the rise. At that time, it just felt like, whoa, there's a new wave. Oh, yeah. Cody Garbrandt is here to stay, right? And then he goes on to fight TJ Dillashaw. Gets 2 knockout losses, but obviously he's TJ Dillashaw. A lot of people believe he's the best bantamweight out there. Pound for pound, he's also in that conversation as well. So I don't know. It's definitely a big fall that he's taken. And you just start wondering questions. You start wondering questions about how he's maybe getting trained, about maybe where he's at mentally. But yeah, it's a tough one. I also think the UFC has some responsibility too. I always thought like the Pedro Munoz fight was a bit rough. I mean, not to throw any shades to Renan Barão, but that would have been a nice maybe reintroduction back into title contention.
Well, I think the question here is
somebody else that Dillashaw ruined.
Yeah.
The question here is why or what happened, and I think it either could be two things. One, was the Dominic Cruz fight a little bit of fool's gold because we came out of there saying this guy's so much poised beyond his age. He slowed the fight down. He wasn't a brawler. He was systematic and tactical. Was that because Dominic Cruz was injured? He was. And because Dominic Cruz doesn't have the knockout power to expose Cody Garbrandt in the same way his opponents afterwards did, could also be true. If it's not that, you wonder if it was too much too soon for Cody. Too young. Maybe it changed his dedication to training, dedication to strategy, willingness to learn things. You never know. But the wheels are off the damn train at this point. Wait, is there wheels on trains?
Yeah, of course.
There's wheels.
Yes.
Well, rolls.
Pick your damn metaphor. This is tough. I mean, look, the Death Star even had that one spot you can hit it in, and you can make it self-destruct. And Cody right now has got a problem. He will not slow down and calm down. If you hit that button, you get him into war. I mean, it was reckless the way he fought. I know afterwards he said there was a headbutt that sort of got me into fight or flight mode. But when fighters are now figuring out, we can get you in fight or flight mode, and then it's all about just having a decent chin and keeping their counter shots tight. You can get that guy out of there. He's only 27, man. It's so tough to see somebody.
He's an emotional dude, too. I mean, he's a guy who I think it really has plagued him to have lost both of those fights to Dillashaw, and I'm sure that incrementally it got worse, obviously having to deal with it a second time, a guy that he truly wanted to beat. I really believe that took something out of him, and that's why I tried to do a piece on him before this fight with Munoz, just basically asking him, like, where are you at mentally on this? Like, how do you put that stuff behind you? Where are you at in terms of looking at this guy, competitively again? And he was basically like 5-minute answers about, having a son and, having the chance again and all this stuff that you want to believe, but you could tell just not this, like, kind of, a little bit of the lip service because you're like, it's burning him. It's burning him. So what happened so after talking to him and watching him go in there and all of a sudden you see his eyes go black and him start to fight that way again, you just feel like, I put it on Twitter, I'm like, it's like watching a friend lose his money at roulette. You're just sitting there watching him and you're like, no, you keep going bigger. Go back to what play smart. And then he gets caught, and you just feel bad for him because I think he wants to erase as quickly as he can, what has happened to him. But it's just, unfortunately, the fight game, the spiral gets bigger rather than go away. You know what I mean? When you do that. So I feel like that's what you're watching. You're watching him in that kind of vortex.
I tweeted it out yesterday. Did anybody hear the interview Aaron Bronstetter of TSN did with Justin Buckles?
I have not,
I
but
saw it
Oh, buddy, that is. I mean, you cannot miss what Buckles has to say. Now, look, Buckles is going to be the guy who was, of course, a head trainer at Team Alpha Male, and then he got booted out apparently by Uriah Faber. And, he's going to have an axe to grind, right, one way or the other. So you have to take everything with a grain of salt. But basically, his assessment is none of this is accidental. This is not, and by the way, this is a thing that's utterly preventable. He thinks, one, you have to know who Cody Garbrandt is as a fighter. And he goes, yeah, he is emotional. That's why the responsibility falls on a proper coach to dial that back. And he actually went through the corner advice they were yelling at him and how bad it was. Like, they just didn't understand what makes him tick. The real indictment that he made, and again, I haven't talked to Uriah. I haven't got his side of the story. But the side of the story that Justin Buckles paints is that Alpha Male is not properly situated to grow him. And that was the whole reason TJ Dillashaw left. So there might be something to that idea. And it's like a 50-minute interview, 5-0. It's a long one. But the case is compelling. It's compelling that they can bring him to a certain spot, but he needs a deft hand. And he actually goes through the whole game plan they had for Dominic Cruz and why it worked. So to me, it's like if you were Fighter of the Year material in 2017 and you're still 27 and you won a UFC title, I am not ready to close the door on you at all. That seems to me very foolish. But here's my question to the panel. For a guy who went all in Alpha Male, I mean, that was the genesis of the whole dispute, and I'm not a traitor and you are. If Justin Buckles is right, his problems are essentially, again, this is going to be his arguments, his allegiances. What is he supposed to do?
Well, the proof is sort of in the pudding, right? I didn't get a chance to check out the whole thing, but Dwayne Ludwig as well was there and found a certain amount of success and then is gone, right? And then the Buckles is the same thing. Certain amount of success and gone. It's like that does start to raise a red flag that maybe there's something going on there, a power structure that doesn't make sense to the guys who are getting the success. The guys who are kind of, so whether that's a Faber ego thing or whatever that's going to be, something's weird there. Something's lost in that translation. It's an action-oriented sport. It's a results-oriented sport. That's what we're seeing. So something is off there.
Buckles likened it to a football team where the owner starts making coaching decisions, interfering with the general manager, which as somebody who's a fan of the Washington Redskins, boy, I got my spidey tingles up when I heard that. That will ruin a football franchise. That's what he likened it to. Again, Uriah has a right to give his side of the story. I don't know what the truth is, but you have to begin to wonder if a dude was performing that highly and now not, and you're still young, you're still athletic, you still have big power.
Yeah. In some ways, he's never been the same since John Claude Van Damme wheel kicked him that time at.
Who?
You know that story?
He had a thing with Van Damme where he got kicked accidentally in the face.
Van Damme was working out with them. Great story that both Uriah and Cody tells in great detail. And Van Damme did like a spinning kick and accidentally clocked him. And Cody ran out angrily, and Van Damme was so upset that he was broke down crying and went on his knees and bowed in front of Cody to try to get him to forgive him.
I did not know that.
Yeah, under the radar right there.
Hey, did you see the corner video, by the way?
Run the credits.
After Cody got knocked out, and even Bruce Buffer is sitting there, and he just gets all pissed off and shakes his head and slams his fist down.
No, I didn't
He's
see
either really upset like we were in seeing a former champion fall apart, or maybe he had money on it. So either way, it was a tough night for Bruce.
I also like Chuck's point a lot, in the sense of he was doubling down, because at that point when you're brawling like that, and he was landing shots too, it could have gone either way. What if he would have gone a crazy knockout and everybody would have been like, wow, what a great fight, super exciting, Cody's back, he just knocked out Munoz, So it's one of those things where he's doubling down because he was up here and he doesn't want to incrementally, build his way back up and maybe get a decision win over Pedro Munoz. No, he wanted that big knockout. Yeah. So I think part of that is too, and part of that is maturity, and part of that I think it's on him obviously for fighting emotional, but also on the coaches, dial him down a bit. Hey, look, we don't need this. Go out there, play it safe, I guess.
And by the way, shout out to Munoz for executing a dangerous plan in order to beat Cody in that way. You got to have a chin.
Could have gone either way.
You've analyzed his fights, Cody Garbrandt.
Yeah, sure.
I mean, it's not like he always has bit down in the mouth guard and just swung for the fences. I remember the very first fight, I think it was Marcus Brimage was maybe was early on. Yep. I remember watching him there and his precision and how he pieced him apart. That's what made me know that the kid was something, because there was rumblings about how good he was coming out before he got in the UFC, and you saw him execute that, where the thing was playing out very in slow motion almost for him. And I remember thinking, like, this kid's going to do big things because he sees everything in front of him so well. His movement is so good, and his punches were right on. He had that power.
Yeah.
I don't know where it started. I don't know where, like, I know he's an emotional guy, but I'm not sure where the, like, all right, let's just wing it and see what happens. I don't know where that came from.
Well, I'm not going to play psychologist, but I mean, you hear his backstory when the way he tells it
got a rough
with all the
upbringing.
detail.
Of course.
I mean, it's
Yeah.
you can
I
understand.
mean, I've talked to him about all of that through the course of time, done major features on him and things like that, but I don't remember him fighting that way early on in the UFC career. That's all. I just remember him being way more measured and methodical in how he got it done.
I mean, the Cruz fight is the perfect example. Completely different fighter than what we see today.
You just can't tell me he hasn't regressed.
yeah.
It quite clearly has. And someone on Bloody Elbow, they were, I think, a little bit too dismissive of his opportunity for rebound. But they had argued, I think quite rightly, would you favor him to beat Lineker or Moraes or even a Rivera at this point? I don't know that I would, to be quite candid with you, if he's going to fight the way he fought against Munoz.
How did you think he looked before he snapped into that mode? Did you feel like he was back? Because I felt like watching him, I was like, hey, we're seeing his movement back. We're seeing him do this right,
Again, that's no guarantee of winning, but I completely agree.
Yeah.
When he decided, and again, he says it's from a headbutt. Okay, fine. The headbutt is not what bothered me. What bothered me was afterwards, not that I want him to, like, cry over the loss, but when you're like, kill or be killed, it's like, dude, there are some fighters where that's okay. Yeah. Cody Garbrandt, you are too good. Right. You are too good of a fighter.
Too much, and he hadn't even got there yet. Like, the Cruz thing was the beginning. I thought it was going to be, he could be a star in the sport.
He's too talented to be fighting that way. And so that was really the kind of thing that I noticed. But if you ever heard the Buckles interview, he talks about the Dominic Cruz game plan. He likened it to Cruz being a hyena and Garbrandt being a lion guarding a carcass. So the hyenas come and try to take it. Every time they come in, you swipe. And they noticed that when they were trying to implement this game plan, he would get, not frustrated, but he couldn't contain himself. So they had to create buzzwords to keep him in charge of ring generalship. So when his footwork got a little out of play, they told him, this is by Cody's request. They're like, give us something we can tell you that he can't pick up on that you know what it means. And Cody apparently goes, swag on him. So whenever Cody got a little bit too excited, the Buckles would be in the corner, swag on him, and then he would kind of dial it back. So if you go back and listen, you can hear swag on him in the first 40 seconds of the fight. It's kind of interesting.
I will say that guys like Buckles, if you're thinking of coaches in other sports like they were making the comparison to, if there's a coach that you associate to winning, you want to see that coach there as long as they can. You want to see them coaching. As soon as they go and there's a new coach and that coach isn't winning, it's very glaring. But yet in MMA, we only think about this when we're told and something like that. We just don't naturally make that connection, which is kind of it tells you how much the sport needs to be more observant on that level.
And even what he said, last thing on this on Buckles, then we'll move along, but even what he said was, he was like, we definitely all trained TJ. But by the time TJ won a title, he said, I couldn't claim him as my guy. Yeah. By the time Cody beat Cruz, I remember Team Alpha Male had been getting abused by Cruz for a solid decade. That was the guy that he could say, I trained that guy. That was my guy. So again.
Good for him speaking out then.
Good for him speaking out. But, and in fairness, Uriah Faber has, I'm sure, something to say about this. I don't know what it is, but at least that's one side of the story worth hearing. Okay, last thing on UFC 235. I remember on this very show, back when Ariel was on, he and I were talking, and you may have been on the panel. I'm not sure if Wags was here or not. We were discussing, wow, wouldn't it be awesome to see Askren in the UFC and Askren fighting GSP in Canada? Wouldn't that be big? And I remember people scoffing at he and I at the mere suggestion that Askren,
because he needed to get more experience.
He needed to get, that's right, that World Series of fighting experience. That was really what was missing here. That was the key ingredient. And I remember so many people hitting this up being like, are you insane? Now look, I'm not here to tell you that Askren is an overnight star, but Chuck, I'll go to you on this since you did the piece with him last week. But you want to talk about somebody who made an immediate impact. Yeah. Do you get my sense of things that of all the people involved in UFC 235, in some senses, the biggest winner is Ben Askren in terms of how much ground he gained in public visibility and support.
And he's concerned by that because he had a certain ratio of haters to guys who liked him as a fan. And he feels like his fan base of people who like him now has way outgrown the people who hate him, and this concerns him. So it tells you his mindset. At least he thinks that way in these big picture things. But I think going in, man, he told me like on the Wednesday before I was hanging out with him going to the bookstore for this piece, and he was saying that he thought that he was going to come out of this a way bigger star. Like he really believed, like he was, and it was just so matter of fact the way he talks. He's like, because he was just going through the scenarios, and he kind of knows his play with Dana White. He knows that he wants to almost foster at this point like their animosity towards each other and make that into its own thing. But that's the only manufactured part. The other part was that he just knew he was going to translate come fight night. And I don't think anybody would have known that it was going to go down quite like that, where he was going to have to go through that heavy weather early, getting thrown down like that. And then I was like, oh my God, this is unbelievably, because I've written pieces too. He should be in the UFC. He should be fighting GSP. And to see him get knocked out that quickly, I was like, wow, we're all going to look like fools. But to see him recover, and regardless of the controversy, he had recovered enough to put Lawler into a very bad place with still, a minute and something to go in that round. Amazing. I thought he came across, both guys came across great. Lawler looked great because of the way he handled himself and, just that opening sequence. But I thought Askren, if you weren't paying attention to him, you've got to be watching him on every level now, right? I mean, the dude is compelling on every single level, outside and inside the cage.
What's crazy is you said translation. And I think when we all thought we knew his trash talking would translate, or maybe not to the level it did, but we found that out quickly in the last 2 months. But we were wondering, is his wrestling really as good as we thought? Could it really translate against the elites? And could his fighting, could his striking be above remedial level and translate? What we found out in the end, none of those mattered to a certain degree in this fight. It was that his spine, his backbone, his toughness, his will of a champion, although he's not a champion, but has been, was really the thing that I think that translated most. So he wants to be hated. He wants to be that pro wrestling heel, if you will, and give him credit. As soon as that fight was over, he grabbed that microphone and called out Dana.
The pro wrestling heel with the amateur wrestling doggedness. He wants to show you that those things are together.
The reason why he wasn't the pro wrestling heel coming out of that, because he fought like a babyface. That was the ultimate babyface.
He did.
I know he got the victory in the end, but that was one of the oddest victories in the sense where when Brock Lesnar lost to Frank Mir in his UFC debut, that's one of the biggest victories ever, and Brock lost that fight. But when he made such a statement in his debut that I'm this absolute beast that you need to see and love, and I think Askren, even though to his credit he ended up winning the fight, he made that same statement with his toughness, and he has to be the happiest man in America, although he would never admit it, that Usman beat Woodley. Has to be, right?
Yeah, that's a little strange too. What do you think, Danny?
I don't know about that because he is super close with Tyron, and we saw the whole time throughout fight week how close they were. So I don't think he would ever wish anything bad on Tyron Woodley. But and he's always talked about that 165 division too. But in terms of him being a star, he says he could be a big star in the UFC. I think he already is. If you look at the numbers that he pulled as far as media wise, his scrums, his interviews, on the MMA Hour, that interview blew up. And it's because he also checks all the boxes, literally the Diaz brothers made a career out of, having beef with Dana White. Well, he kind of has that. So people
love that. They love that.
People love that.
Well, he knows it. I mean, he knows it like your typical employee hates his boss, right?
Yes.
He knows it So he's like, why not just have one on a grander stage where I'm the everyman going against my boss?
Yeah. So there's that to be said, and then also the toughness. I think also the way the fight ended, controversial. That was one of the biggest talking points leaving UFC 235. Everyone was like, "Well, was it a choke? Was it not?" So even that controversial finish, just fueled the fire. And I think he's right. Also, he said 98% of the division would have just crawled up into a little ball and taken the punishment there. And I think he showed incredible toughness as well. And not only that, but also outside of the cage, he can pick anybody and start a beef with anyone, and he has something smart to say.
Pretty down to earth dude. You saw right afterwards too. He goes up to Robbie Lawler. I don't know if you saw the little footage there, but he's like, "I love you, Robbie. I'm sorry I never wanted to fight you." He's telling him that. I mean, it all goes into it. That level of being a sincere person, that level of being a heel, his ability to fight, back it up, his want to pick and fights with everybody in the division. You know what I mean? It all goes hand in hand. I thought it all came together.
I also think it's also the perfect timing for him because I feel like a lot of people get burnt out through this process of doing media and all this stuff, right? Throughout the beginning of someone's career in the UFC. He didn't really have that because he was fighting overseas, right? So now that he's in the UFC, it's he's got all these things he just wants to let go. Competition, media. I mean, he's doing all kinds of media.
He's making up for lost time.
Everyone,
making up for lost time for sure.
He'll be in London.
Yeah, and then he's flying out to London to go. I mean, it's like, and the thing about it is, and I said this before, it's not that I don't think skepticism about who has star potential is unwarranted. If anything, people in MMA are like, we've cured weight cutting, or we pay guys, blah, blah, blah. It's I don't believe any of you. Everyone makes claims in MMA that are not true. So having been generally a skeptic in MMA, it makes you come off like a hater, but it's really valuable because you're going to see through a lot of the nonsense. So it's not even that I mind. It's just that you could tell, man, like the guy had a cult of personality in college wrestling. People were showing up with fake fros to support him. And then he goes to the Olympics. He's a Dan Hodge Trophy winner. He was in Bellator. Remember when he beat Koreshkov and it was like 240 strikes to 3?
Yeah.
He had his back and was like doing this number as he's riding. And you're like, dude, what people do this? Like, showmen do this. Showmen. Yeah. Can you imagine if he retired on my radio, well, not on it, but like he did when he did the retirement media tour, he stopped by my radio show, and I thought that was the end. Can you imagine? Like, dude, pettiness in this business will bury your career. It will bury it.
That's all he's pointing out, too.
It's amazing.
He's pointing it out. Like, he's not even afraid to point it out.
He got a get out of jail free card, and thank God he did, but
he's taken very little damage.
True.
So it's like we didn't know what his chin and his toughness was coming in. Now that he's proven it, he doesn't have a lot of miles on him, if we're being honest.
No, for 34. Duke, you know who told me that was years ago was Duke Rufus. Back when Duke and I worked on Glory together, he was like, dude, I'm telling you, please listen to me. That dude has an iron head. Apparently what happens is a lot of guys think they can throw knees on him when he shoots. And he was like, I have seen Ben take knees you couldn't imagine and just roll right through them. So apparently Duke was telling the truth.
Yeah.
Kind of interesting. All right, here's another issue that has popped up in the media a little bit here, which is Conor versus Cowboy. There are reports out there, fairly unreliable, but we're going to run with them because we have an hour to kill, of the real holdup in that fight, Danny, is that the UFC wants to make it a co-main, and I guess Conor, perhaps Donald Cerrone as well, are saying, no me gusta. All right, what's the right answer here? Let me ask you this. Let's say all that's true. I'm not saying I have a dog in the fight, because actually I don't really care that much. But maybe you do. Why can't Conor versus Donald be for the co-main event?
I don't see Conor ever fighting in a co-main event for the rest of his career. I mean, he's at a point right now where, I mean, he is the biggest star in the sport.
Dude wants to run his own promotion.
Yeah, exactly.
Much supposed to be a co-main.
I can't possibly see him fighting in a co-main event.
Forget that. What's the problem with it?
That he's the star of the show.
Yeah.
Good.
He's the star of the show. Like, if you put him in a pay-per-view, I guarantee you, I don't care who else is on there. Maybe a Brock, maybe somebody else. But I guarantee you, most of the people that watch that pay-per-view, regardless of what spot he's on that card, is because of Conor McGregor.
He shattered pay-per-view records.
Exactly. He holds like the top 2-3 pay-per-view records, right?
He holds the top boxing and MMA record.
Yeah, exactly.
The Mayweather packet.
Okay, I know it's a little. It's okay, but he's number 2, let's say, all time in boxing.
Yeah.
Number 1 all time in MMA.
You know, in pro wrestling, I hate when people. I know you hate when the pro wrestling guy talks pro wrestling.
No, they secretly love it.
Sometimes on pay-per-views, they have matches. Sometimes they just have these contract signings, and it turns into an S show, and they fight each other. You could put Conor McGregor on a pay-per-view headlining it in a talking battle with Nate Diaz, and you would sell. So the point is, very few people or nobody ever gets to that level where they can sell. So I don't care right now, UFC. He's a main eventer every time he fights until that balloon pops. Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
This is the sell your soul
Well, this
era.
is Joe Rogan's version, by the way, so let's...
Right. I mean, let's,
Where every main event...
I believe Donald Cerrone also said that.
Okay.
So, I mean...
If you've made exceptions the whole way, you've basically, the reason there's so much dissension around Conor McGregor is because they've made exceptions for him. They've given him special treatment in just about every way possible. All of a sudden, you're going to say no, sticking point is you got to be a co-main. That makes no sense.
Look, they throw fake titles on people just to justify it as a main event.
Yeah.
Conor fighting, you don't need to justify it. It does not need to be a title fight. Just roll him out there. There's so much intrigue to see how he would bounce back. The violence of Cowboy, it sells itself. I don't get the decision making because I thought we were in full on sell our souls for pay-per-view.
Okay, but the decision making is a title fight should headline a card, right? So let me ask you this then to the table. Can you imagine any available permutation of a title fight that you could at least conceive of being ahead of Conor? Anything. I mean, what about Jones DC3?
Even Jones DC3 would not move the Conor.
I would even say maybe Jones, Brock Lesnar, but even then, I think the top billing is always Conor McGregor. And something also I feel like that bothers him is that at this stage of his
that
career,
wouldn't be a title fight either.
Say again?
I said that wouldn't be a title fight
let's say that. Somehow it was or something.
Hey, by the way, didn't Conor Nate 2, which wasn't a title fight, break all the UFC pay-per-view records? So didn't Raquel Pennington, wasn't she in a title pay-per-view match and sold 55,000 buys? Why are we having this conversation?
I'm not saying Conor or Cowboy's wrong. I'm saying it's worth having an exercise about it.
This is a question. I don't know if the answer to this, but does fighting in the co-main event get you pay-per-view points?
Yes.
Does it get you less than the main event?
I don't know.
That's a good question as well.
Obviously, that Mr. Businessman, Conor McGregor probably knows those.
Yeah. And something also, speaking of Mr. Businessman there, he's, in this stage of his career, he's always made it seem to be like, I'm working in conjunction with the UFC.
Right.
Like, this is a partnership. I want to own the UFC. Putting him in the co-main event kind of feels like, we're the boss. You're fighting in the co-main event. And he doesn't
by the way, he bounced back to his credit. After Dana said that publicly, he's suddenly tweeting out about fighting Floyd again, putting out videos and saying, I was so close, and I hit him to the body, and I hurt him.
At this point, that's a threat, not a promise.
And by the way, Paulie Malignaggi has a new podcast that he brought his podcast back on Showtime. It's a video show. He did mention on there, I'm connecting the dots, not him. He said, look, I'm in great shape. Something's on the table. I'm in the gym right now. I don't know if it's that.
How quickly this thing devolves.
Could be an Adrian Broner rematch. Could be anything. But I'm saying Conor's smart to get right out there and say, okay, UFC, you don't realize my value. And maybe they're just trying to discipline him, but wake up here. Wake up.
I can't imagine. I really can't imagine in his, just given his history, and Dana White, all the exceptions he's made for him because of that history of selling, that there would really be a sticking point. Can you really imagine that that's a sticking point?
They tried to keep out Ben Askren for no good reason. Pettiness is not something that they are unaccustomed to doing or being.
Then it's got to be the bigger play, like they're trying to humble him. They're trying to it's more of the business aspect.
I mean, maybe he's trying to get proper 12 as the center of the octagon, logo.
I think after a couple of losses, they're like, okay, well, now we can flex on him. And he's like, no, you can't.
Yeah.
That's what it sounds like to me.
But I'd wait till he loses one more time before I'd flex on him.
Yeah, sounds like
I'd cash that check. But obviously the dude, if they put him against any permutation, whatever you want, I feel like it's still doing over 1 million pay-per-view, or it's still doing 1 million pay-per-view buys.
Several.
That's what I mean.
Million, but like
it's doing at least
1 million minimum.
That's what I'm saying.
What if they announce next pay-per-view he's going to be on commentary the whole night? You're getting 50,000 more buys. I'm telling you, like any form of his name on there, all right?
Yeah,
the announcers are going to drink proper 12 the whole night. You're watching that, all right?
Yeah, which I've done. All right. Which takes us to, we go from an interesting story to, here's the thing, and I'm being dead serious about this. I don't even know what to say about it anymore.
Because we've had this discussion.
BJ Penn is back. BJ Penn is going to be fighting Clay Guida at UFC 237. And I saw everyone be like, I'm all in for this. Y'all are sick, man. Y'all are sick people. Like, it's just weird at this point. And I just saw people being like, I'm all in for the return of BJ Penn again. I'm like, dude, and I said this before, before I really covered this full time, BJ Penn was my favorite fighter. I have his closed guard book in my house. Like, he was something magical. But, sometimes it's your time in life to be old. It's my time in life. I'm getting old. Like, that's just, everyone's got a time. And I know folks have said, Brian, that, they've given him somebody he could compete against. They've been saying that all this time.
Yes.
They said it against Seaver. Nope. They said it against Ryan Hall. Nope. Yair. Nope. And now they're giving him somebody that's going to wrestle into his guard, they think. Well, number one, Clay Guida can strike better than you think. And two, if he gets softened up to the point, his guard kind of goes away. I don't even have emotions for this one anymore, other than I just can't believe it. What do you
I have to admit, my brain fought itself when this was announced, because my left side of my brain was just like, oh, no, not again. And the right side was like, oh, it's Clay Guida? This is going to be hot fire. Yeah. And then I thought of BJ Penn's brain. And then it's like, take the keys away from Granddad. Okay? Let's stop. It's not like UFC's benefiting marketable. If it's one of those things where you're justifying a name being in the co-main or something to move product in Hawaii, it's not even anything of that. It's just this guy still wants to fight and they're still employing him. Step in. It's it.
I mean, what's the whole thing with the Chuck Liddell? Dana White kind of forced him out, basically, after that Rich Franklin thing. He said, no more fighting. He was very public with it. They gave him, like, a role in the UFC for a long time. And then he publicly condemned it when Chuck Liddell inevitably came back when he was done with the UFC. It's not that big of a difference. I feel like in 2014, after what happened with Frankie Edgar, and he went through that whole process of, it was like one of the most, depressing, press conferences I've ever been a part of, when he was shedding tears in there, and you think, this is it for BJ Penn. I understood him coming back for one more fight beyond that. I was like, how these guys are. But we've been putting him away since every one of these, we put him away. Okay, that was it. And then he comes back again. It just gets to a point where you're like, there's really no logical explanation for what we're trying to accomplish here. Because let's say he goes in and beats Clay Guida. What happens then?
Yeah.
He's going to fight again. I mean, it's just one of these things you're like, I don't think that there's a better BJ Penn behind the one we keep seeing. So that's really the thing. So it just feels like we're seeing a shell of the original self.
I almost felt that same way about Diego Sanchez winning this weekend. It was like I celebrated, then I was like, oh, wait, this means they're going to just put him on
That
a
is,
higher level.
it becomes a
not fighting.
thing.
Yeah.
It
It was
becomes
actually it was actually one of the good things about Cody losing. If he had won fighting that way, that would have empowered him even more.
True.
So I'm not saying I'm glad that he lost, but I do think that some kind of the appropriate feedback. You were going to say, sorry.
I mean, we've been through this how many times where, like, BJ Penn just tries to come back. And, I mean, what else can we say at this point? The man wants to fight.
How do you feel? Are you sad? Are you frustrated? Are you
Yeah,
numb?
I'm sad. I'm also frustrated with the promotion. He hasn't won a fight in forever. And, this is a legend. This is someone that, helped build the sport, and he shouldn't be put in this situation, right? And, we've talked about numbers of times on this show how, fighters need to be protected, from themselves. And I think this is a perfect situation. And look, dude, Clay Guida's a grinder, man. Like, he's going to put it on you. He's going to go in there and put the pressure on you. So it's not even a really good matchup either. I think, for example, the Ryan Hall one, when that fight got announced, like, I wasn't down to see BJ Penn fight again, but I'm like,
Now,
it's Ryan Hall. We know he's not going to get knocked out. We know there might be something exciting there with.
He'll just shred your ligaments.
Right.
Dude, BJ last one against Matt Hughes. Like, how depressing is that?
2010.
UFC 123.
Almost a decade now since he.
Yeah.
last
2010. He's on a 6-fight losing streak.
Yeah.
It's like.
This is where we're talking. You talk about soft matchmaking, which they don't do. You don't get soft tests. You barely ever will you get a light comeback. We even made the argument: is Cowboy potentially a light comeback for Conor? There's no such thing in the UFC. If he has to fight, could he get a light comeback? I mean, he doesn't have to fight. No,
I mean, my only
Wasn't Dennis Seaver? I mean, like,
Yeah,
it was. Then that's it.
My
You're right.
only hope is that what they've done is they're like, okay, here's the thing. We'll let you retire in Brazil. Like, we'll put you in Brazil where you've been training and where it all started for you. I mean, it started for him not in, there, obviously Hawaii and California to a degree, but I mean, the ancestral homeland of this art that changed your life. First American to win the black belt in the Mundials. Maybe they're saying something like that, in which case it's like, all right, you just hold your nose in for one more time or something.
Right, or if this was Aloha Stadium in Hawaii and you're like, we need you to
if
be
they
there
did
for
that,
this.
if they were going to Hawaii,
understood,
I'd be like,
of course.
Okay, all right, fine. I'll live with it. And maybe that's what this is in Brazil, in which case I'll also live with it. But if this is just, okay, here's another permutation we can try. Man, no thank you. No thank you at all. I don't derive any pleasure from watching that.
Right.
All right, so that leaves us to our last topic. Time now for Under the Radar, a story that everyone you saw maybe, but didn't get quite enough attention as it made its way through the news cycle. We always start on that end of the table and then work this way forward. Chuck, what is Under the Radar?
Well, I was out in Montreal for GSP's retirement, and he did leave the door slightly open when the questions are like, would you come back if this, and you do sometimes wonder, like, is this permanent? But he took himself out of the USADA pool this past week, so now the testing pool. So now, if he's going to come out, I think it's like a 6-month window. So that's fairly telling. I think that there's something definitive about that step that made me think, like, I think we really have seen the last of GSP. I'm fully accepting that now. That he's gone.
Oh, stop it.
So, but I mean, he could come back. He could, but
Well,
I'm like,
2 reasons real quick why he will. One, the Brock exception in that rule, and 2, if he's going to come
I don't
back,
know if they the UFC. I guess they
you know how
could, but the
calculated he
UFC
is.
took some.
He's going to set a year in advance. He's going to say, okay, I'm coming back next year.
Yeah.
And he'll put himself
Well,
back.
that's a good point. He does telegraph.
But it is another barrier that you.
It is.
It is.
I just feel like that's his. I think that's his little.
That was a
signature.
pretty big signal, yeah. All right, Brian, what's under the radar?
One championship, who, as we know, has been adding a lot of big names, ex-UFC stars, did add Vitor Belfort, which is decent news to its own. I was surprised. I think some people were. I think at this point in Vitor's career, it would have been more likely for him to be in a Bellator in my eyes, but I don't know what was the allure on one. But what I didn't like was when your own Mark Raimondi talked to him in Vegas, and they're talking about what kind of fights you want to make. What kind of opponents are they going to be in there with you for one? And he brings up Roy Jones Jr. What? And it's like, I want to do a special bout with him where we can box, but dirty boxing will be allowed. Guys, can we stop this? This is a little bit of runoff from the BJ Penn situation, only it's worse. Roy Jones is 50 years old. He had 75 pro fights. Boxing just finally kicked him out the door and said, stop fighting full time. There's nothing to gain here. Vitor Belfort, there's a place for you in the pool if you want to play with other old guys, all right? It's called South Florida. The MMA version of that is Bellator. You ever see the movie Cocoon where there's that egg shed thing on the bottom and you can no one drug test and you can fight old guys and have fun? Go fight Machida or Chael or Fat Rampage or the Iceman. No, this Iceman right here, not Liddell. Fight anybody but Roy Jones. What is this?
Danny, what's under the radar?
It's under the
that one
radar.
up,
It's not under the radar anymore. Go ahead, buddy.
Speaking of legends, Mirko Cro Cop unfortunately had a stroke last week. And, because of that, the doctors recommended, obviously, he not continue his MMA career. And, he's calling it quits to a legendary career, and he's not often talked about in one of the greatest, but, he has a pretty good resume. And, he's calling it quits. I believe he's on a pretty good win streak. He hasn't lost since 2013.
10-fight win streak.
10-fight win streak. Hasn't lost since 2013. In the process, beat guys like Kigmo, Roy Nelson recently. So
He beat USADA.
He beat USADA.
So that's not that difficult.
So it kind of went under the radar because there was so much going on with UFC 235. But he truly is one of the greats in MMA. So.
Actually,
End of an era, for
if you've
sure.
never, I don't know if he put it out on Twitter or not. He might have, but if you go to Instagram, go to the post and look at all the stud kickboxers and MMA fighters too, but some old school legends that he fought, and some of the ones he didn't in the comments. Go look at that. It's actually a pretty cool little list of people paying their respects. I saw him fight Remy Bonjanski in Arena Zagreb, and I remember we're in town and they could hear your accents because you're American. Everyone speaks English in Croatia, and they're like, "What are you here for?" Like, "Oh, we're here to watch Mirko Cro Cop. You heard of him?" They're like, "Yeah." Sort of like asking, "Have you heard of Michael Jordan or something?" Like it was crazy. It was really interesting. So
Cro Cop's final kickboxing fight, by the way, was against Drell Big Baby Miller, the American heavyweight who's fighting
Joshua. Yeah, right.
this year. So
by the way, did you see their face-off in New York? Were you there for that?
I was not.
Oh,
It was intense.
When Miller pushed him. Yeah, that was a show. Under the radar, I got two quick ones for me. One. This is something, every time I post news that is inconvenient to anti-doping narratives, everyone pretends it doesn't exist, so I'm going to take this opportunity to make sure everyone saw it. There's actually a blood doping scandal happening in cycling. Shocker that they haven't cleaned up sport because you can't. In any event, they caught some Norwegian guys doing it, and there's a whole blood doping ring. Turns out they beat all the testing and they beat all the biological passport data. The only thing that got them was apparently criminalization laws and snitching, which is the war on drugs. So y'all keep pushing this fantasy that the anti-doping stuff we're doing is going to work. I promise it will. #never. Second part about
I
it.
missed it last week. He presented that topic on the After the Beat, and nobody cared either.
Yeah, no, here's the thing. People think it's a settled issue when it's not. It's not a settled issue at all. In fact, all the data suggests that the methods of and the protocols for anti-doping are dramatic failures. In any event, so here's the good news, though. Shouts to Dr. Andy Galpin, who is a sports scientist. He shared this on Twitter. I found this very interesting. There was a university research project done on MMA strength and conditioning protocol. And what they found was, and I have to read the study exactly, but what they found was, if you're doing traditional stuff, where you could be excessive bag work or pulling a sled for no particular reason, let's say old school training, that in terms of what it does for functional fitness in a fight is close to zero. That if you're not doing basically the most modern strength and conditioning that is highly attenuated, highly specific for those real needs, you're getting nothing out of it other than the provocation of injury. And he was basically his point was, unless you have a really good strength and conditioning coach, you're wasting your time.
Does John Jones have a really good strength and conditioning coach?
Oh, I bet he has the best. Right. I bet he's got the best. So.
Hey, did you see there was the second UFC fighter was finally revealed?
Muslim or Islam, whatever his name is, Salikov. Yeah. It's a whole other can of worms. That again, it's settled wisdom. Why bring it up? But all these things are kind of oh, you don't know anything about this drug, and yet y'all are kind of trying to enforce it a little bit. It's a little weird.
John Jones should have been DQ'd. Next time.
That's another one. All right, we are not quite done here. We have one more segment to go, which is where we take your tweets using the hashtag #TheMMABeat. Thank you to everybody who submitted one. We really appreciate them. I have good news for you. We're going to answer them, number one. And number two, you don't have to go anywhere. We're coming right back. And we are back. I am Luke Thomas. That is Danny Segura, Brian Campbell, and then Iceman Chuck Mendenhall in the hat. This is After the Beat, where we answer all your questions using the hashtag #TheMMABeat. Again, thank you to everybody who submitted those. We always appreciate it. What fell back there during the show? Do we know?
It's my phone. I do it every week. I'm sorry.
Why does it keep falling out? Do you have NBA breakaway pants where the pockets are facing down to the ground?
That's always so cool. Yep.
Just put it in your
Thank you.
jacket pocket.
Thank you.
Well, I wouldn't say it, but you keep doing it.
Remove the fourth wall all you want, all right?
Yeah, we're so far past that, buddy. I mean, it's a
the fifth wall.
It's a low budget show, bro. I mean, let's Let's be real about it. All right. Time to get to your tweets here if we can. And let's get to the first one. All right, Danny. The UFC has ramped up the number of events they have annually, and the media has seen it as being something negative. But isn't having more events helpful in giving y'all always something to talk about? Fight breakdowns, topics for your shows, content for the websites. Are we bitching about the hand that feeds us, Danny?
I think there's something to say about that a little bit, yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, you know, the more fights there are, the more there is to talk about. But for example, we got UFC Wichita this weekend, right? I don't know how much.
Could you find Wichita on a map?
Probably not.
I'm not sure that I could either.
I don't know how much time we spent talking about that. Why? Because, I mean, to be honest, besides the main event, there isn't a whole lot to talk about. So I understand that point. I think there's some truth to that. But I do think that, you know, by putting so many cards, it's also so hard to go in depth into things because you just got to move on to the next and the next and the next card. So, it's a double-edged sword there.
There's one edge, and it hurts. There is such a thing as too much of a good thing. Mm-hmm. That's it.
That's it.
Thanks, Confucius.
We're out.
I personally like a little more space between fights because there's so many good characters in this fight game. There's so many good stories to tell. I'm a guy who likes to know the stories and tell those stories. I feel like at the acceleration from which we go from one to the next, so much of that deserves attention goes unsaid. I feel like that's the only thing that bothers me. It's not so much that there are a lot of events, but there are certain events when you're like, well, I have to pay attention to this when there's really not much on it and you know nothing's going to come of it. But you're not able to really focus on it anyway because it just is coming off a major pay-per-view or there's one the following week. You know what I mean? So it's like, it's in that sense, like it takes your focus and splinters it too many different directions. Yeah. I'd like to see some of these guys, like it takes a lot now to distinguish yourself as a fighter. Yeah. There's very few like Adesanyas who are getting all the love. There's guys out there, like Johnny Walker, for instance. I'd love to know more about him, but he's fighting, obviously he's fighting on every one of these fight cards we're talking about.
That's why he's
but it's guys like that. You want to see them coming a little bit too. Not in retrospect where you're like, well, he's already arrived. Who is this guy? You know, you want to be able to give it equal coming in and going out.
You don't like Weekend at Bellator where you get a different card in the same city every night?
Yeah.
Brian's just always a different one, huh? I would say, I mean, the truth is that the sport and media generally has changed so much that it's not as much of a problem now where you can put the really good stuff on ESPN or pay-per-view and you can put the rest on the streaming platform and they're going to get $1.5 billion for it and you're like, this is a decent arrangement. But for folks who didn't, part of it is a somewhat antiquated argument where we used to have to do this. To your point, guys were just getting left behind. It was really hard to stand out. And then two, you were like, at first the audience wasn't ready for all this. Like, here's just a fact. When the UFC started adding more content, they pushed out all that old audience. Like all the people I used to watch pay-per-views with 10 or 12 years ago, they're not around anymore. And like, granted, Conor brought some people back and Ronda brought some people back and John brings people, whoever. But they definitely pushed out a huge portion of their own audience. And there was a time there where you're like, we don't know which way the sport's going. Yeah. I think we're still living with some of those ghosts a little bit, but it's not as much of a deal now. I mean, truthfully, I got to do 15 hours of just radio a week. It's like, you know, yeah, it helps me a little bit. Can I be honest, though? Like, how much does a UFC Wichita help me get through a 3-hour show? Not much. No. Not much. Every single day, 3 hours. Bro, I'm pulling all the strings from UFC 235. I'm trying to get as much out of that as possible. So yeah, it's a benefit, and it's a somewhat outdated argument now, but it definitely had relevancy for a while there. So, all right, next, please. Ryan, we'll go to you. Why aren't we watching? This is from Jed Michoud, by the way. I mean, you want to talk about fiery takes? Oh my God, he is. Some fighter's going to find him and
so far outside
uppercut
the
him.
box, we can't even see the box anymore.
Yeah, some fighter's going to find him and uppercut him into living death. Why aren't we watching Robbie Lawler fight Anderson Silva? I demand satisfaction. Do you like the idea of Mr. Bobby Knuckles? Oh, no, Bobby Knuckles is Whitaker. Mr. Lawler taking on Mr. Anderson.
God, I love everything about that. I never even thought about that. But Robbie Lawler.
What weight class? 185?
Robbie fought at 185 in Strikeforce.
Yes, and Robbie's a large welterweight, as we know, and that's perfect because that's what you do with old names. You make fun, creative fights with them. I always bring up the name, but what did Rich Franklin do the last 5 fights? He just fought in catch weights and moving up and down against other old names that can sell tickets, either in a co-main on a pay-per-view or an in-between one. UFC on ESPN, that is your main event. Are you kidding me? Yes. Jed, thank you. Thank you for feeling what I'm feeling, all right? You know what I mean? I give a shout-out to all my sisters who like weird carnival fights. BC cares, if don't nobody else care, right?
I'll pass. I don't know.
What?
That doesn't move me.
Doesn't really do anything for me.
Wow. All right.
Well,
Are you about it?
Also, if
is it only because, are you saying that because Robbie Lawler has relevance left in his division, or are you saying that because you just have no interest in seeing those two guys?
I don't know. I haven't given it deep thought. It's just when I see it on paper, I don't. You guys ever seen Marie Kondo on Netflix? She's like this person. She's this Japanese lady. She blew up because her show went viral. She shows up to people's house and like declutters it and shows them how to live in a really healthy and organized way. And when they go through, like, we have too many plates or something, too many clothes, she'll make them put all the clothes together, and then she'll say, keep the ones that spark joy. Right? Like, you kind of see it, and whatever it is, it sparks joy. Lawler versus Silva, to me, does not spark joy.
You ever had a fried egg on top of a cheeseburger?
That sparks joy.
That's what this fight is. Not everybody's going to like it. It's going to get messy. The yolk's going to get all over the place, but that thing tastes like...
I'm not saying it's bad. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying
it down.
I feel like it's the same situation of, not 100%, but close, of Wonderboy Thompson fighting Anthony Pettis. It's like, sure, is it a good fight? Like, would I see it? Yeah, but what does it really do? I feel like Lawler, still has a lot left in the tank. I feel like, dude, after watching what he did to Askren, like, that looked like a vintage
two former
Robbie
champions,
right there for a
but
bit.
I think the fact that there's, it's just, we always have some kind of context with these two guys that it means something. Whatever they're doing means something. This would be the first time that they would basically be saying, like, we're not sure what this means. I think that that's where it loses some of its appeal.
Yeah.
But at the same time, if you're just strictly thinking of it from two guys who've had these legacies and that still have more than an ounce of themselves to give, I feel like
I'm not saying it would suck. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just kind of like, I'm not moved by it. But he's been, Jed, how, like, if you're Jed, are you by definition toothless? You know what I mean? That's a name you give to a really dumb person.
Uh-oh.
No, I'm teasing.
Wow.
I'm teasing.
Wow.
No, but I'm saying he has been all over it on Twitter. He loves this idea. And again, I'm not saying it's wrong. That's not what I'm saying. I don't know. I was unmoved by the idea.
If someone told you Anderson Silva has 3 fights left, you would want every single one of those 3 fights to be the Robbie Lawler, Nick Diaz, Conor McGregor type varieties rather than Derek Brunson and,
I'll pass on the
and
Conor
every
McGregor.
other. Who's the guys that Silva just signed?
Jared Cannonier.
Jared, come on. Like, you really, what does that fight do for you?
See, here's the thing.
I
like Jared Cannonier, so I'm okay.
Oh, so let's put him against one of the greatest of all time. What does that accomplish?
Listen, you're
Nothing.
asking me for my personal preference. My personal preference is I like Jared Cannonier. I'm not asking anyone to agree. Just telling you how I feel.
Plus, I don't like the idea of
pizza story.
Silva
Yeah,
fighting
pizza story.
welterweights. If anything, I'd like to see him fight,
There's no
light
rules
heavyweights
when
on
you're.
him.
I think wash fights should be open weight. Just whatever.
Hey, look, if they made it, cool, man. I'm not going to bitch about it at all. But if they don't, I'm not going to be like,
To be honest, I can't think of there's no Anderson Silva fight at this point that I'm like, I can't wait to see that. I almost feel like that with any Anderson Silva fight, what you're saying. I feel like I can't get above a certain, at this point of his career. I don't know. But that's certainly one of them that would be high up there, like just something like that.
Look, all I'm saying
As high as you can take that passion bar.
all I'm saying is Jet has bad ideas. That's all. I'm saying.
You just wanted to bat him
I'm
down
just
once?
totally teasing. I'm
All
just
right.
completely teasing. Or am I? Let's go to the next one. Chuck, what do you think about refs standing fighters up due to no action? So we got to this a little bit.
Okay.
I guess, number one, the general feeling about what kind of involvement a referee should have. And then I guess two, the Usman Woodley situation, how do you feel about that? So what's your worldview on that?
You mean stand up or separate? Like, are we talking about?
I think referee intervention is what they're talking about. Stand-ups is particular, but let's expand the question.
There's a feeling in the building when you're there, right? Like you're not listening to commentary. There's a feeling in the building that builds up. You hear people booing. It gets fairly pressure filled from the standpoint of the referee. Now they're supposed to block that out and see what they're seeing.
Yeah.
But you understand that there is a very live, real pressure happening to the arbiter in that situation, where they're saying like, "Hey man, this fight sucks. This is stalling. Do something." I feel like it's so rare that I see something where it's truly stalled. That's the thing. Most guys in most positions, whether they're on top on the ground or they're in that the 50-50 position on the fence, and you're like, are they trying to improve? What are we doing here? Are they trying to improve their situation? Is one guy trying to do something, the other guy's just holding on? You know, you want to know that it's definitively a stall, and that's where the gray area is. I sometimes have I'd say that it's like that. It's more subjective. Like sometimes I see it and I'm like, that needed to be separated because one guy who's ever dominated the action is keeping it in a spot where nothing can happen beyond. It's an impasse. Well, then you reset him, you get something going again. But in a situation like this last one, it was a little harder, obviously, because there were, I think Usman landed something like
141.
Yeah, well, body shots alone. I know not all of them. There is something about the intention.
Yeah, some are like.
Yes, the intention of what the intention behind those punches are.
Right.
Just trying to stay busy. You can understand how that is not really considered. Or the shoulder strikes. There was a lot of that.
Yeah,
type of thing.
there was a ton of
so,
those,
I mean, those types of things, I mean, they don't really, but I felt like at times you would see him doing stuff where you're like, okay, no, he is doing it, so that was a tough call for him.
Let me ask you this way for the rest of the panel and for you as well, but give me a yes or no so I can move it along. Yes or no, are you bothered in general by referee stand-ups or separations?
No,
I know that's
not in general.
Okay, how do you feel?
No, it's not a gray area to me. I think when the offensive fighter stops being offensive, I think it's like in basketball. If someone's guarding you, you have 5 seconds to sort of pivot with the ball before the ref will call the whistle, unless you have to pass it. I think that there should be, a certain amount of time you can work in that guard, but then you got to get offensive. And if you're not being offensive, especially when you're being warned, what's the big deal?
Correct answer. What do you think, Danny?
No, I'm all for it. I think in many cases, especially if you're in a dominant position, like even if it's boring, you can't just take that away from somebody. But like, in that, Kamaru Usman versus Tyron Woodley situation where you're in the 50-50, I mean, sure, someone's in a somewhat dominant situation because, one's against the cage, the other's not. But it's not really like mount or side control or anything like that. So I was fine with that. The only thing that kind of did bother me was the comment of, this is a fight, because all of a sudden you're putting pressure on a fighter that could maybe go, okay, well, I got to do something. I might get to take a point away here or something. And then he goes out there and brawls and then maybe gets knocked out.
Well, to Goddard's point, though, he did 8 consecutive tweets to Luke in which he
I see
explained that he apologized for that. He said he said he shouldn't have said it. So
Interesting.
And also, like,
it was
for example,
in response it was in response to Usman saying, "Why are you separate? Why are you splitting us up?"
Yeah,
I think it should have just gone separate, and that's it. Because part of the strategy of Usman was tying him up, tiring him out, getting those punches in. Frustrating Tyron. So, once you put that comment out there, that stays in the fighters in the back of their minds. So, like, it could change the outcome, or the fighter could be like, "F it, I'm sticking to my guns here." But you don't know that. So
real quickly, this is what Mark Goddard, he wrote me many things, but one of the things he writes is the following: my use of the words, quote, "it's a fight," was not the correct wording to use at that point. It was the wrong choice. I should have used different wording, no question. I have nothing but respect for Kamaru and his entire performance. Lastly, my actions and words have been misconstrued, and for that I can explain in full. Kamaru Usman fought an unbelievable fight, and if my words, "it's a fight," caused him, of all people, offense on the back of such an amazing performance, then I am truly sorry. My words at that time were wrong. First of all, I totally commend his humility, but please continue.
But I just also want to say, because sometimes we go a little hard on these guys, MMA is better with Mark Goddard being a referee.
1,000%.
Yeah. And in most cases these days, I feel like the referees are so much more advanced than they used to be.
Yes.
There was, maybe you will remember this, UFC 84, I think it was. There was somebody, and I think it might have been Clemente, had his arm, somebody was in a dominant position and had a guy with his arm pinned behind his back, and this went on, and the referee came in after about a minute while the guy has his arm pinned behind his back on the ground in a dominant position and stands them up. And I was thinking about that. I was like,
that's insane.
There was almost no outcry about that at the time. Yeah. I remember the fighter himself, I believe it was Clemente, was talking about it.
No love.
He was like talking about it
the original
afterward.
No love.
He was talking about it after, like, dude, he had his arm trapped under his, like, how can you be in a more dominant position? Nobody talked about it. And you realize that how far we've come, that now we dissect, at least we're looking at dominant, people know what a dominant position is for the most part.
I think I'll just quickly add, since we have so many more to get to here, but I went back and I've been watching this fight so many times. Again, the "it's a fight" thing, Goddard has apologized, and when he said it, I was like, that's just not great. But remember, these guys are fighting in real time, and he's reffing in real time. We give commentary in real time. How many times have you gone back and seen an opinion you said about a year ago, and you're like, no, that didn't pan out well.
Last week's show.
Last week's show. I mean, you're saying, we fired and rehired you. No, I'm teasing. But the point being is this. it's hard to do things in real time with precision and accuracy. It's just really difficult.
Can we just give the MVP award real quick? We mentioned Usman to Woodley's mom. Have you seen that video?
Hold on. Let me finish the point. Let me finish the point before you just have your tangential ideas. My view is that we are operating, and again, I have to convince people, and this is one I'm a little bit less, like with PEDs, I'm like, it's so obviously true, though, the way we're doing it is bad. But this one, I'm willing to have a debate about it because I'm not sure I know all the exact right answers. I think the way that we approach refereeing is antiquated. And there are a lot of people out there who express antiquated ideas because they really believe them. But when you say things like, I think Joe Rogan said you should earn all stand-ups. I think this is an antiquated way of thinking. This is like saying in basketball, you should not have a shot clock. Like the shot clock is in every way better for basketball. It forces action. It forces better team play. It forces passing. It forces shooting. It forces a game where you can get 100 or more points without, scoring on a side. If you don't have a shot clock or 3 seconds in the paint or whatever, you have a much less interesting game. The idea is not that referees should be arbiters of entertainment, but they should be arbiters of action. Mm-hmm. And we know that because, one, BJJ has a stalling problem, and two, so does wrestling, except we empower wrestling referees. I say it all the time. If you watch wrestling, Danny, you wrestled, you know this. True or false, referees at amateur wrestling are on their whistle.
Yeah. They'll call you for stalling,
You can't even take a step backwards without them going nuts.
The sport would die if it was all about neutralization.
It's
you know what I mean? If the idea is a neutralized guy just holding there.
This idea, like I've seen it. You get lesser UFC fighters and they'll try and like dive in and they'll hit the hips along the fence. And the guy defending it, he can defend it enough to not get taken down. And the other guy can defend it enough where it looks like he's doing something. They will stall each other. Yeah. They will stall each other forever. Kamaru Usman and Tyron Woodley, here is why I believe Mark Goddard should be exonerated. I went back and I timed everything. I looked at what he did. Here's the only situations where he separated them along the fence is when they had 50-50. Each guy had an underhook. Each guy had an overhook. And over 2 minutes would pass and no one even tried to pummel in. Yeah. Guys, if you're spending 2 minutes along the fence and no one's looking for inside control, there's no takedown here. With your hips all the way back, there's no takedown here. The first step is getting hip to hip and then getting inside control or changing levels. They didn't change levels. They didn't go for inside control. They didn't go hip to hip, nothing. Mark Goddard was absolutely justified in separating them. The only one that was weird was the stand-up because he was right to do it, but right as he was doing it, Kamaru Usman almost had a gift wrap. That way he was like, what? Like he's like, but here's the thing about Kamaru. He doesn't pass guard. Yeah. It's not a feature of his game. And you can hear after 30 seconds, a minute 30, you got to move. You got to progress. I absolutely defend Mark Goddard on his calls, just not the thing about it's a fight because, hey, you're fighting Tyron Woodley. Oh, by the way, that's hard to do.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well said.
Next one. What is your favorite place you visited as a tourist or a place you'd love to go one day? Boys?
Wichita. No.
Oh, man. No, I'd rather die. I would legitimately rather die.
Probably, for me, that I went to, Big Sur, California. I've been up there a few times, but
cool.
Every time it's amazing. Yeah? It's like going to, I don't know, heaven or something.
Yeah.
I've long dreamed of the national parks on the West Coast and plan to get those off of my bucket list. But I will say a few years ago, I did a week-long with the family camping trip in Acadia National Park on the shores of Maine. Ooh. And I had no idea that on this East Coast, which I thought I dominated. Look, I've been all through the mountains of Vermont and New Hampshire. They're incredible. I had no idea beauty existed in New England on the East Coast like that till I actually started.
I've heard Maine is low-key awesome.
Yeah.
Well, you have mountains and ocean together at a certain height, which you don't have anywhere else on the eastern seaboard. So it's
the rest is all just beach, right? Yeah. What about you?
Last year I took a trip to, I was in Spain and I went to Barcelona and that was pretty sick. I'd totally live there. I loved it.
It's an amazing city.
And then a place that I'd like to go, I always like to go to Thailand and just, roam around and check it out. It looks nice.
I've been lucky to travel a lot. My dad was in the Foreign Service, so I've been to a lot of places. Swam in the Dead Sea. That was nice. A bucket list moment. That was cool. I've seen the pyramids. I was born in India, been to Japan, I've been to a lot of places. Colombia was an interesting adventure and obviously remains one for me. But the number one place I've been to, man, it just really, I can't say anything bad about it, was Madrid. Madrid, Spain, for me, is just is a magical place, man. It is, the people are they're shitty, but Sorry, they're bad. But the food is incredible, and the sites are incredible, and the culture is incredible, and Spain's my favorite place outside the United States, so I would go Madrid, Spain. And Barcelona, too. Like, they're
I haven't been to Madrid.
You never been to Madrid?
No,
it's totally different.
Yeah.
It's like old world Europe.
Yeah.
You know?
I mean, Barcelona's pretty old as well.
I know, but the Spaniards hate on Madrid because you go there. I remember we went to the train station in Madrid that was bombed. I went there, obviously not during the bombing, and I asked the lady buying the ticket. I was like, "You live in Madrid, right?" She's like, "Yeah." I was like, "Which place do you like more, Madrid or Barcelona?" She goes, "Barcelona." I was like, "What?"
Barcelona's sick.
It is cool. It's pretty nice.
I like it.
When's UFC Barcelona?
Yeah, well, UFC Barcelona. I don't know.
You ever been to Bettendorf?
No,
I have.
No.
Beautiful. There's eagles right there on the river.
Yeah, I'll pass.
All right. It is cold.
Bring
a jacket.
America is huge. There's pockets of humanity, bro. There's like a lot. There's like 50. It's like there's 50 states. Yeah, I don't need to see all 50.
Yeah.
Nah, I'm good. All right, next. Okay, table. For Tyron to get another title shot, should he root for a Colby win and an Askren Lawler rematch? Is that his best chance? So, what is Tyron's best path back to the title? Dean Thomas speaking to Brett Okamoto this week, being like,
Yeah.
he might have a hard road back after all those hard feelings in the promotion. So what do you guys think?
That's probably a pretty good scenario for him, honestly. And, I asked Askren last week before the fights, what happens if you win and Woodley loses? And he said he would give him first right of refusal. He'd basically check his motivations and how he might be able to get back before he would start lobbying for himself. So if that's the case, we know that he wants to challenge Till or Masvidal. So if that's the case, wherever it's going to happen, his best bet is for Colby Covington to go in there and beat Usman, and then because they have the beef already with
got the lottery ticket.
So I feel like that's his best bet right there.
I would say I don't think Askren's too much of a player in this one because Askren, as you said, he doesn't want he would have to get Tyron's blessing.
He wins one more and he becomes.
But I think if Colby wins, dude, that fight can build up a nice fight there. Also, don't forget about 185. Tyron Woodley has mentioned 185. What if Kelvin Gastelum wins the interim belt?
That's a good point. Yeah.
And beats Robert Whitaker. All of a sudden, I believe Tyron has a win over Gastelum, right?
He does,
Split
yeah.
decision. Mm-hmm. You can just go back up there, beat somebody, and then probably get a title
I don't see
shot.
them rewarding him. The UFC hasn't seemed to go out of their way to help Woodley out. Not a company guy in their eyes, but would he be small for 85?
He's a big dude,
Big
man.
dude, yeah.
He's a big dude. Like he has to do road work
Gastelum
to get
is
down.
considered a small guy for 185. Look at what he's done.
Yeah, exactly.
Real quick,
Robert Whitaker was a welterweight.
I had fears coming in that Usman was maybe too much of a front runner because we'd never see him have to rally back, and we still haven't learned that because he absolutely dominated Woodley. I never thought about it. Was Woodley a little bit of a front runner where we had never seen him have to have
I don't
plan
think he's
B
a
or
front.
C?
No.
I mean, the Thompson first fight was a little flip-flop. So.
Front runner to me is somebody who quits when they don't necessarily have to, or when things get hard. That's not. Tyron
See, I don't. The quitting angle, I'm not throwing in. I'm just saying, look, let's say in basketball, a front runner is somebody who, if they have the lead, they can always protect it and put you away. But can they rally? Can they rally back?
I just think people are like, "Oh, Tyron looked flat," and he did look flat. But I think he looked flat because Tyron has people are like, "Oh, he's got a bad gas tank." I don't think that's true, but I don't think he has a super great one, and I think he knows he doesn't have a super great one. So he wants to manage his resources, and when he manages it, it's like if you're fighting Kamaru Usman, you want to save that for the real threat, which is the takedown. So he kind of just got stuck in these positions where he wanted to do more, and he probably could have done more, but I don't think he wanted to spend enough energy where something would be a problem later. So front runner, no. But against Darren Till, I think he knew he had Till's number. I think he knew that. And so he fought in a way that was commensurate with the threat, and obviously he was right.
Was it the third or fourth round when they broke out for just a minute in a gunfight?
I think it was fourth.
It was the fourth round. So that was after another Goddard stand-up. He separated them, and then they started sliding.
I just remember one of those punches of his just zoomed right by. Like, it was so close. I was like, damn, that would have changed the whole complexion,
you could tell he'd wait and all fight for that moment, and probably conserving whatever energy he had, but you got to credit Usman for taking every drop out of that gas tank.
Yeah, and Usman's amazing in that way. So I think Usman, just think about this, like, who's a bad matchup for Usman? And I don't know that there is one. Maybe Askren is, we'll see. But somebody who's a good striker who can force a takedown and then has excellent submissions, because you saw RDA nearly get a Kimura. It was only by the grace of God that Kamaru got out of it. I wonder if that might be an interesting matchup for him. So we'll see. But Askren versus Usman, I think.
I think somebody that can keep up his pace, and Askren can wrestle for days.
He's going to wrestle for days, exactly. That's going to be, he's a fun addition, man. Yeah. He's a fun addition. All right, next. Table, we always say MMA is better than boxing when it comes to mental health or brain damage, but is that really true? Nobody in MMA has aged much compared to boxing, so we don't really know. But you've got Hunt, Chuck, Vanderlei. He's got Micro, but I think he means Mirko. Or I can't read it. No, he's got Mirko, but with a C. Yeah, GSP, Coleman, and Hughes have recently shown some symptoms. Yeah, I kind of feel like probably that MMA is less damaging to brain health, given that you have a wider target area, so it's not as centrally focused. But I think we've got some, I think there's a storm on the horizon.
Well, it's a tough comparison because you're comparing softer punches with bigger gloves to absolutely violent strikes that knock you out with knees and kicks and 4-ounce gloves. So it's what would you rather have?
But it's less volume of head impact, I think, over time. It's less volume.
But MMA is also known for having sparring wars.
Absolutely.
And so, I mean, that's...
But less so these days. And, you know, wrestling, you can get your head hurt. Obviously, you can get concussions, BJJ, but obviously it's a lot less.
Yeah. Well, why do we worry so much about BJ Penn? You don't want to see him take any more damage. I mean, that's the bottom line. We've seen him take as many beatings as you ever want to. Chuck Liddell was the same thing. We saw him walk away, and there was obvious speech component there where you're like, you start to be concerned. I mean, the bottom line is a lot of these guys, you know, I don't know, like Matt Hughes, I didn't really hear too much from during his retirement and stuff, but Mark Hunt had a whole piece in the thing about his brain, you know, like where he wrote a Players Tribune thing. I feel like you're right when you say that another 10, 15, 20 years, that it'll seem pretty equal, to be honest. I think they'll seem equally dangerous.
Or, you know, hard to tell the difference.
Yeah,
right?
hard to, exactly. Yeah.
It's going to be interesting. So we'll see. That Cleveland Clinic brain study, as it's ongoing,
at least
it's going to be something to follow right there. Okay, I think we have one more. Let's do it. One more. If you had to pick an alcoholic beverage or cocktail to best describe your personality, which would you choose? So you can have any kind of alcoholic beverage or a cocktail. So it can be a beer, it can be a glass of wine, it can be something else. Of course, I picked this question. What do you think? Danny, which one are you?
He's a Harvey Wallbanger.
I'll go with aguardiente.
Ugh.
Because I'm lit.
All right. Fair enough. Fair play. What about you there?
A Zima. No.
A Zima with a Jolly Rancher?
Pretty true.
Yeah, it's actually not that bad.
A Zima with a Jolly Rancher?
Prime, like 94 Zima, not any kind of...
Yeah, of course. Only the best stuff.
Yeah.
Chuck, what do you think?
Probably a Pink Lady. No, I'm just kidding. I'd probably go with like a whiskey drink. Maybe just straight up, just a glass of
Proper
whiskey.
12?
Proper 12, whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
basic.
my drinking mascot is a Double Gin and Diet or Double Gin and Coke Zero. But I don't know how is that representative? I don't know.
No sex on the beach.
Bloody Mary?
No. Are you a Bloody Mary guy?
Hell no.
I think they're gross.
Have you ever drinking one of those Clamato, Bud Light?
Yeah.
Tomato? That's the worst creation
People are like,
ever.
I want to go drink tomatoes on a Sunday.
But it's funny though, the people who love,
I know.
they love
that
That's
stuff.
like a ritual to go have a Bloody Mary.
God, no, I don't think so. No, I would just say, what would I say?
What's good to drink with when you're listening to abortion metal?
First of all, it's death metal, number one.
Oh, but you like that band Crying Children or something awful? Yeah.
No, God, I don't know. I guess I'd go with a whiskey drink too, but I just feel like that's so typical white guy, you know? You know what? I'll just go with, a Boulevardier. There you go.
Yeah. I almost said that.
Yeah, a little bitters in it. That's what I like. I like a well balanced, a little bit of bitterness in it. You know what I'm saying? All right, I think we're done. Enjoy UFC Wichita this weekend. If you're watching the video, thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, all that stuff. We really appreciate you guys tuning in. And we're back on Monday, and we're gonna have coverage of UFC Wichita. We'll look ahead to the UFC London card and a whole lot more. So appreciate you guys tuning in. For Chuck, for Brian, for Danny, I'm Luke. Hands up, chin down, let them fly. This is the MMA Beat.